They tried to erase a town. Instead, they ran into Rednecks. They had conquered 17 star systems. They had never lost a battle. Their ships were fast, their weapons were deadly, and their soldiers were trained to kill without mercy. When they looked at Earth through their long-range scanners, they saw a planet divided into thousands of small pieces. Cities with millions of people, military bases with powerful weapons, but also small towns, far away from everything, where the humans lived simple lives and had no real protection. The commanders liked to start their invasions quietly. They would find a small, isolated place. They would land their soldiers. They would kill everyone before help could arrive. Then they would move to the next target. By the time the planet's leaders understood what was happening, they would already control half the world. For Earth, they chose a town called Buckhorn Hollow in a place called Tennessee. The town sat deep in a valley surrounded by thick forests and tall hills. According to intelligence, only 847 humans lived there. The nearest military base was over 200 miles away. The town had no walls, no soldiers, and no advanced weapons. It was perfect. The first came down at 3:47 in the morning. It was a warm night in late summer, and the sky was full of stars. The ship landed in a field behind an old farmhouse, crushing the tall grass and scattering the cows that had been sleeping nearby. The ramp opened with a hiss, and 12 soldiers stepped out into the darkness. They wore armor that could stop most bullets. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through steel. Their helmets had special visors that let them see in the dark as clearly as day. The squad leader, a veteran of 6 planetary conquests, looked around at the quiet countryside and felt nothing but confidence. These primitive humans would die in their beds without ever knowing what killed them. What they did not know was that Dale had been awake for 2 hours already. Dale was 73 years old. He had fought in a war called Vietnam a long time ago. These days, he spent most of his time tending his farm and trying to keep coyotes away from his chickens. For the past week, something had been getting into his henhouse, and Dale had decided to put an end to it. He was sitting on his back porch with his rifle across his lap when he saw the lights in the sky. At first, he thought it might be a helicopter. Then the object got closer, and Dale realized it was something he had never seen before. It was shaped wrong. It moved wrong. And when it landed in his back field, it made a sound that no earthly machine had ever made. Dale did not panic. He had seen strange things in the jungles of Vietnam. He had learned long ago that fear got men killed while calm thinking kept them alive. He watched as the ramp came down and the figures walked out. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and too many joints in their arms. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The first alien raised some kind of device and pointed it toward Dale's house. It made a soft beeping sound. Dale understood immediately what was happening. These things, whatever they were, had come to hurt his family. His wife was sleeping in the bedroom. His grandson Tommy was staying with them for the summer. Dale lifted his rifle. It was a Remington 30-06 that his father had given him 50 years ago. He had killed deer with this rifle. He had killed boar. He had killed men in a foreign jungle when they had tried to kill him first. He sighted carefully on the lead alien, adjusted for distance, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. The alien's head snapped back and it collapsed to the ground without making a sound. The others froze for a moment, confused. In that moment, Dale fired again. Another alien fell. Then the plasma bolts started flying toward the house, and Dale dropped behind the porch railing. The wood above his head exploded into splinters. He crawled backward into the house, grabbed the phone, and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Bobby," he said when his neighbor answered. "Get on the tree, tell everyone. We got visitors, not the friendly kind." The phone tree was something Buckhorn Hollow had used for 50 years. It had started during tornado season, when people needed to warn each other about dangerous weather. Each family had 2 or 3 other families to call. Within minutes, the whole town could know about any emergency. Tonight, the message spread faster than it ever had before. Aliens landing at the place. Armed and dangerous. Bring your guns. Within 20 minutes, pickup trucks were rolling down dark back roads. The drivers did not use their headlights. They did not need them. They knew these roads like they knew their own faces. Their fathers had driven these roads and their grandfathers before them. Every curve, every pothole, every shortcut was burned into their memories. The squad had recovered from the initial shock and was advancing toward Dale's house. They had called for backup. 2 more were coming, but they were having trouble with the terrain. The trees were thick and the ground was uneven. Their armor was heavy, and they kept stumbling on roots and rocks that they could not see clearly even with their night vision. They did not understand this place. Their scanners showed them heat signatures and movement, but the forest seemed to swallow the information as quickly as it appeared. Animals moved through the undergrowth. Birds flew overhead. The land itself seemed alive and hostile. The first reinforcements from town arrived at Dale's house 15 minutes after his call. There were 7 trucks carrying 23 people. They ranged in age from 16 to 80. They carried hunting rifles, shotguns, pistols, and in one case, a compound bow. They had no armor, no training in fighting aliens, and no idea what they were up against. But they knew these woods, and they knew how to hunt. Murphy took charge without anyone needing to ask. He was 64 years old, and he had spent 30 years as an army ranger before coming home to breed hunting dogs. He was a quiet man who spoke only when he had something important to say. When he did speak, people listened. "Spread out," he said. 2-person teams. Use the land, don't let them see you. Don't let them pin you down, hit them and move. Hit them and move. The townspeople vanished into the forest. They moved silently, the way their ancestors had moved when these hills were full of bears and mountain lions. The soldiers, for all their advanced technology, had never faced an enemy like this. They were used to fighting armies that stood in lines and shot at each other across open ground. They did not know how to fight shadows that struck from the darkness and then disappeared. The first team to make contact was Billy Wilson and his daughter Sarah. Billy was a mechanic who worked on trucks for a living. Sarah was 17 and had won the state archery championship 2 years in a row. They found a group of 3 aliens moving along a creek bed and set up in the trees above them. Sarah's first arrow hit the lead alien in the neck, where the armor did not cover. The alien grabbed at the shaft and fell to its knees. Sarah's second arrow hit the next alien in the same spot before the first one had finished falling. Billy shot the third one with his deer rifle before it could turn around. All across the valley, similar scenes played out. The aliens had technology that the humans could not match, but the humans had something the aliens did not understand. They had knowledge of this specific place. They knew every deer trail and every hidden cave. They knew where the ground was soft and where it was hard. They knew how sound traveled through the hollows and how light moved through the trees. By dawn, they had lost their first. Someone had filled a truck with fertilizer from the farm supply store and driven it into the landing zone. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sunrise. The commander, who had just stepped off his ship to assess the situation, caught a crossbow bolt through a gap in his armor and died without ever seeing who had killed him. The remaining aliens retreated to a clearing near the center of town. They tried to establish a defensive position. They called for more support. They reported that they were facing heavy resistance from unknown forces. But they could not explain what they were fighting. The enemy did not have uniforms. They did not have ranks. They did not have any organization that they could understand. They were just people. Old men and young women, farmers and mechanics, grandmothers and teenagers. They came out of the woods, fired their weapons, and then disappeared again. As the sun rose over Buckhorn Hollow, they began to feel something they had never felt before in their long history of conquest. They felt afraid. The humans had not run away. They had not screamed or begged for mercy. They had not waited for their government to protect them. Instead, they had grabbed their guns, kissed their families goodbye, and gone out into the darkness to fight. And they were winning. The response came at noon. 3 more descended from the sky, carrying enough soldiers to fill a small army. 200 aliens, fully armed and armored, spread out through Buckhorn Hollow with orders to eliminate all resistance. They found an empty town. The streets were quiet. The houses were dark. Cars sat in driveways with their doors hanging open, as if their owners had fled in a hurry. The aliens moved carefully through the abandoned buildings, searching for survivors. They found none. They found signs of life that confused them: meals half-eaten on kitchen tables, television still playing to empty rooms, beds that had been slept in recently, but no people. It was as if the entire population had simply vanished into thin air. What they did not know was that Buckhorn Hollow had been preparing for invasion for almost 100 years. Not alien invasion, of course. Nobody had expected that. But the people of this valley had faced threats before. They had faced floods that cut them off from the outside world for weeks at a time. They had faced bandits during the hard years of the Depression. They had faced federal agents during Prohibition, when half the town made their living selling moonshine. And they had learned to survive. Beneath the streets of Buckhorn Hollow ran a network of tunnels that connected most of the houses in town. Some of these tunnels were old mine shafts from the days when men dug for coal in these hills. Others had been dug by bootleggers who needed to move their product without being seen. Still others were storm cellars that had been quietly expanded over the years until they connected with their neighbors. The townspeople had not fled. They had simply gone underground. Dale's wife was leading a group of 20 women and children through the tunnels toward the old Henderson farm on the edge of town. Was 71 years old and had lived in Buckhorn Hollow her entire life. She knew these tunnels better than anyone alive. Her father had been a bootlegger, and she had played in these passages as a girl. "Keep moving," she said calmly to the group behind her. "Stay quiet, we'll be safe soon." Above ground, the aliens continued their search. They kicked in doors. They overturned furniture. They scanned the buildings with their advanced sensors, but their sensors could not see through 50 feet of solid rock. The tunnels remained hidden. Meanwhile, the fighters of Buckhorn Hollow were preparing their next move. Murphy had set up a command post in an old hunting cabin deep in the woods. With him were 30 of the town's best shooters and hunters. They had spent the morning watching the aliens land and spread out through town. They had counted the enemy soldiers. They had noted their patrol patterns. They had identified their weaknesses. "They don't know the land," said. "They're using their technology like a crutch. Take that away and they're just targets." Bobby, who ran the auto parts store in town, nodded. "Jimmy says he can rig up something to knock out their electronics. He's been working on it all morning." Jimmy Dawson was 18 years old and the person in Buckhorn Hollow. He had built his first radio when he was 12. He had fixed the town's only computer when even the experts from the city could not figure out what was wrong with it. 3 years ago, some men in suits had visited the high school after his science fair project and had told him that his work was classified and that he should not talk about it anymore. Jimmy had not talked about it, but he had not stopped working either. "I need another hour," Jimmy said over the CB radio, "and I need someone to get me closer to their main group." "I'll take him," said Henderson, was 73 years old and had served as an army nurse in Korea. She drove a pickup truck that was older than most of the people in town, and she could shoot a squirrel out of a tree at 100 yards. Nobody argued with Henderson. While Jimmy worked on his device, the rest of the town's defenders began their harassment campaign. The first attack came at the Wiggly parking lot. A squad of 8 aliens was using the grocery store as a temporary base. They had set up their equipment inside and posted guards outside. They felt safe. They were wrong. The Molotov cocktails came from 3 directions at once, but these were not ordinary Molotov cocktails. Someone had added racing fuel from Jimmy Dawson's garage, along with some other ingredients that nobody would talk about later. The bottles exploded with a heat that even the alien armor could not handle. The aliens who survived the initial attack stumbled out of the burning building, only to find themselves caught in a crossfire. Rifles cracked from the rooftops and the tree line. In less than 2 minutes, all 8 aliens were dead. The second attack came at the old covered bridge on Miller Road. The had identified this bridge as an important tactical point and had sent a large patrol to secure it. 30 soldiers marched across the wooden structure, their boots echoing in the enclosed space. They were halfway across when the bridge collapsed. The charges had been placed weeks ago, during the town's annual bridge maintenance project. Nobody had expected to use them against aliens. They had been intended for a different kind of emergency, the kind that everyone talked about in whispers but nobody ever mentioned openly. But they worked just as well against invaders from space as they would have against invaders from the government. 15 aliens fell into the river below. The water was not deep, but the current was strong, and their heavy armor dragged them down. The survivors on either side of the collapsed bridge found themselves cut off from each other and under fire from unseen enemies in the trees. By the time darkness fell, they had taken control of the town square. It was a small victory. They had lost 43 soldiers, 2 more, and all confidence that this would be an easy mission. Their commander stood in the middle of the square, surrounded by his remaining troops, and tried to understand what was happening. These were supposed to be primitive farmers. They had no military training. They had no advanced weapons. They should have been easy targets. Instead, they were fighting like demons. They appeared out of nowhere, killed without mercy, and vanished before anyone could shoot back. The commander decided to try a different approach. He activated his translation device and broadcast a message across the town. "Humans," he said, "you cannot win. Surrender now and we will spare your lives. Continue to resist and we will destroy everything. You have 1 hour to respond." For a long moment there was silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the square, came a single gunshot. The speaker on the commander's communication device exploded into sparks and fragments. The shot had come from over 400 yards away, in the dark, through a window barely 6 inches wide. The commander looked at the destroyed speaker. He looked at the darkness that surrounded his position. He looked at his soldiers, who were starting to show fear in their eyes. And he began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. Dawn came slowly on the 3rd day. The sun crept over the eastern hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful morning, the kind of morning that made people want to sit on their porches with a cup of coffee and watch the world wake up. They did not appreciate the beauty. They had not slept. Every time they tried to rest, something happened. A shot from the darkness, an explosion in the distance, the sound of movement in the trees. They were exhausted, terrified, and completely confused. They had sent 500 soldiers to destroy a town of 800 farmers. They had lost nearly a third of their force. They controlled a few blocks of the town center and nothing else. Every patrol that ventured beyond the main roads disappeared. Their equipment kept malfunctioning. Their supplies were running low. And the humans just kept coming. The commander had called for reinforcements, but his superiors were not happy. This was supposed to be a simple operation. Instead, it was becoming a disaster. Other units were preparing to invade other parts of Earth, but the reports from Buckhorn Hollow were making them hesitate. If one small town could cause this much trouble, what would happen when they attacked the cities? In the hunting cabin in the woods, Murphy was holding a final meeting with his fighters. "Today we end this," he said. "Jimmy's device is ready. Going to get him close enough to use it. When their technology goes down, we move in. Everybody knows their positions. Everybody knows their targets. Any questions?" There were no questions. These people had been fighting together for 3 days. They had learned each other's strengths and weaknesses. They had become something more than neighbors. They had become a unit. Henderson drove her old pickup truck down the main road toward the town square. She had a white flag flying from the antenna and a casserole dish sitting on the passenger seat. In the back of the truck, hidden under a tarp, Jimmy Dawson crouched next to his device. The guards saw her coming and raised their weapons, but they did not fire. They had been ordered to attempt communication if possible. This old human female with her white flag might be willing to talk. Stopped her truck about 50 yards from the alien position. She got out slowly, holding the casserole dish in front of her, and walked toward the commander. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "Y'all look like you could use a good meal. I brought you my famous green bean casserole. It's got those crispy onions on top that everyone loves." The commander stared at her. His translation device was working on her words, but he could not understand what was happening. Was this a surrender? A trick? Why was she talking about food? "Also," continued, "I wanted to let you know something. Those boys you sent to secure the water tower last night, they ain't coming back, and in about 30 seconds neither are your shields." The commander's eyes widened. He started to raise his weapon. The EMP detonated with a soft whump. It was not a loud explosion, not like the bombs and gunfire that had filled the previous days. It was just a gentle pulse of energy that spread out across the town square like ripples in a pond. And every piece of technology within half a mile went dead. The plasma rifles stopped working. The armor's power systems failed. The communication devices went silent. The shields that protected the alien soldiers flickered and disappeared. In an instant, they went from being advanced warriors to being confused creatures in heavy metal suits that they could barely move. Smiled at the commander. "You boys might want to put your hands up now." They came out of everywhere. From the buildings that they thought they had cleared, from the tunnels beneath the streets, from the woods and the hills and the hollows that surrounded the town. Men and women, old and young, carrying weapons that ranged from modern hunting rifles to antique shotguns to, in one memorable case, a Civil War cannon that the Henderson family had been restoring for the past 30 years. They tried to fight. Some of them picked up rocks and pieces of debris. Others tried to use their dead weapons as clubs, but they were surrounded, outnumbered, and completely unprepared for what was happening. It was over in less than 5 minutes. The survivors were gathered in the town square, their hands bound with zip ties from the hardware store. There were fewer than 100 of them left. The rest had died in the 3 days of fighting, killed by farmers and mechanics and grandmothers who had never fought aliens before but who knew how to protect their home. Tommy, Dale's 16-year-old grandson, was put in charge of guarding the prisoners. He had a shotgun that was almost as big as he was and a look in his eyes that said he would use it if he had to. The aliens, once proud conquerors of 17 star systems, sat quietly and did what they were told. The Methodist Women's Auxiliary arrived shortly after the battle ended. They had been cooking all night, preparing food for the fighters and the prisoners alike. Williams, who had led the group for 20 years, looked at the captured aliens and shook her head. "Poor things," she said. "They look half-starved. Someone get them some biscuits and gravy." The aliens did not understand what was happening. They had been defeated. They were prisoners. And now these humans were feeding them. It made no sense. Nothing about these people made sense. The U.S. military arrived 6 hours later. A ham radio operator in the next county had been listening to the emergency broadcasts and had finally managed to get through to the authorities. When the helicopters landed in the middle of town, the soldiers who stepped out found a scene that they could not explain. The alien invaders were sitting in the high school gymnasium, being guarded by the junior varsity football team. They were eating casseroles and fried chicken and drinking sweet tea. The townspeople were going about their business as if nothing unusual had happened. Dale was back on his porch, rocking in his chair. His rifle was leaning against the wall beside him. His wife was sitting next to him, knitting a sweater for their grandson. A military officer approached them, looking confused. "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" Dale took a sip of his coffee. "Not much. Some folks came by uninvited. We asked them to leave. They didn't want to, so we persuaded them." "You persuaded an alien invasion force to surrender?" "Wasn't that hard?" said without looking up from her knitting. "They didn't know the land, didn't know the people, came in here thinking they could push us around." She shook her head. "City folks, always thinking they're smarter than everyone else." The officer stared at her. They weren't city folks, they were aliens from space. Shrugged, "Same difference. Point is, they learned their lesson. Now would you like some pie? I made apple this morning." The official reports were classified. The government did not want people to know that a small town in Tennessee had defeated an alien invasion force without any help from the military. It would raise too many questions. It would change too many assumptions about what ordinary people could do. But the survivors were eventually returned to their commanders as part of a prisoner exchange. They told their stories. They described what they had faced, and the message that spread through the Dominion was simple and clear. Avoid the rural sectors. The humans there are different. They do not panic. They do not wait for rescue. They do not surrender. They simply win, and then they feed you. And somehow that is worse. Buckhorn Hollow went back to normal. The tunnels were sealed up again, though everyone remembered where they were. The guns were cleaned and put away, ready for the next time they were needed. The phone tree was updated with new numbers. And life went on. On warm summer nights, the people of Buckhorn Hollow would sit on their porches and look up at the stars. They would wonder if more visitors might come someday. They hoped not. They were peaceful people who wanted nothing more than to live their lives and raise their families. But if anyone else got ideas about erasing their town, they would be ready. Dale said it best, rocking on his porch with his rifle never far from reach. "We've always taken care of our own. Don't matter if the trouble comes from the next county or the next galaxy. This is our hollow, our home, and we don't take kindly to folks trying to take it from us." He looked up at the stars, where somewhere an alien empire was learning to fear small towns and the people who lived in them. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We'll be here, we've always been here, and we ain't going anywhere." The night was peaceful, the stars were bright, and in Buckhorn Hollow, Tennessee, the Rednecks kept watch over their land just as they always had and always would.